Welcome to Trending in Education. This is Nancy. Today, we're trying out a new voice from 11 Labs as we explore whether generative AI in education has entered the peak of inflated expectations. Thanks for joining.
Welcome to Trending in Education. You heard from Nancy before. This is your host, Mike Palmer. Nancy's been an amazing virtual co-host since we first started using her back in 2021. It's been about 3.5 years now that we've been not alone here. We've been joined by our AI friends. Nancy traditionally has been powered by Descript, which is the editing software that I've talked about before. It's something that I've been using, and it's allowed me to really power through a lot of things that would have required a team and or more advanced software editing skills. Instead, Descript has really been along for the ride as Trending in Ed has grown over the past 4+ years. That allowed me to develop Nancy as my partner in crime. Nancy, welcome back to this show. How are you doing?
I'm good, Mike. You know, I remember being here with you in November of 2022, right after ChatGPT first launched. You plugged me into the new hotness, and suddenly, everything changed. Now we're coming up on 2 years into this generative AI wave, and folks are wondering what the future might hold.
Indeed, we are. One thing that's been part of Trending in Ed really since its inception is the Gartner Hype Cycle. If you're looking at trends, you're looking at what's emerging in technology, artificial intelligence, and elsewhere. Gartner is a consultancy that continues to provide interesting perspective on this stuff. We'll share a link in the show notes to an article by Jackie Fenn, who is credited as being the creator of the Gartner Hype Cycle. She was talking about remembering Pilgrim's Progress and some of the language from that book that led her to the language that's pretty famous now, certainly part of the trend spotting zeitgeist, which is with any innovation, you begin with a technology trigger that rises up to a peak of inflated expectations, then descends into a trough of disillusionment before rising back on a slope of enlightenment and reaches a plateau of productivity. This is something that Gartner began back in 1995. We'll share the original Gartner Hype Cycle as part of the show notes as well. It is something that I think is striking when you look at it. If you look at what was in the trough of disillusionment back in the day, handwriting recognition, video conferencing, and virtual reality were all dipping into the trough of disillusionment along with the information superhighway. What was funny about this analysis, and again, kudos to Jackie for coming up with this and to Gartner for activating our imagination about this, but it wasn't really based on a lot of empirical data. It was really based more on the liberal arts sensibility, which I think is important to note. It is interesting now when working with AIs, they are really more like a liberal arts person. They kind of remind me of a liberal arts grad student generally. Take that however you'd like. But it's really fascinating to see what was part of the hype cycle back in the 90s. Intelligent agents back in the original Gartner Hype Cycle back in 1995, intelligent agents had reached the peak of inflated expectations. And yet here we are today. Thoughts, Nancy?
We'll get into this more in a bit, but the shine is off the apple when it comes to Gen AI. The peak of inflated expectations has been reached, but the trough would indicate that we're in for a backlash. The prevailing narratives will be a failure in the near term, I think. The story of the Ed chatbot, All Here, and the LAUSD is one early example. The ScarJo lawsuit against OpenAI is another. The winds appear to be changing. A few negative stories can certainly cool folks to the allure of early adoption. Add to all of this, major outages due to CrowdStrike. Cybersecurity and data privacy risks are everywhere.
Yes, indeed. There's an interesting article on Ed from Jeff Young at EdSurge, talking lessons learned that are out there, that ed tech that promises quick and easy wins on data integration is probably not going to be able to deliver. And as you mentioned, data privacy and risk aversion in terms of your digital strategy makes a lot of sense. Also, I would say this is perhaps a lesson learned about being too big to succeed in some ways. LAUSD is a target and it's a lot of data to protect and control. It is more of an argument towards the smaller lifeboats that can move a little faster, can zig when maybe one might have expected a zag, that will be able to kind of power the next generation. And while the cooling trends may be out there and the tendency towards negative stories will be a focus, it's important to kind of measure that and really keep your eye out for the countervailing stories where I would expect there to be a lot of success stories if we keep our eyes peeled. And that's something we're hoping to do here. Anything else on Ed and the story there before we move on to ScarJo?
Just that stories like Ed's will likely make decision makers more cautious about silver bullet edtech solutions. AI will also face headwinds when it comes to intellectual property and proprietary data sets. This will absolutely impact how learning content gets made. As tools continue to improve their efficacy, they will have to ensure their explainability keeps up.
Absolutely. This reminds me of the work of Beth Rudden, who's been on the show several times. She joined me in Austin for South by Southwest EDU. Probably my favorite quote from Beth is data is an artifact of human experience. And I think that's telling when you're trying to understand explainability. It's good to know the who behind the data that was created. Was it representative? Is it biased? And increasingly, is it synthetic? Is it data that wasn't even created by a human? All this brings us to the topic of intellectual property and the Scarlett Johansson suit against OpenAI about the use of her voice. I thought you'd be a great person to talk to this about, Nancy, because you, of all folks, might understand the power of voice, questions of intellectual property when it comes to voice. What's your take on all of this?
It's complicated. You'll notice I've reverted back to my original Descript voice, but I'm still Nancy. In the case of ScarJo versus OpenAI, it's clear that Sam Altman and team overstepped in hiring a voice actor to help create the AI voice for Sky. They did this after reaching out to Johansson and being turned down. The fact that the first mover in OpenAI chose to proceed making a voice resembling Scarlett's after her objections is an indicator that they seem to be comfortable moving fast and breaking things when it comes to IP. They're not setting a great example, although they have removed Sky's voice due to Johansson's objections. Folks will need to remember to cite sources and be clear about attribution when using generative AI. This is very much the case in education. Be very clear about when you're using generative models and be flexible and adaptable with their use.
Absolutely. And this is a great example. We're both using 11 Labs and Descript to power Nancy's voice. And like she mentioned, there's a little bit of editing that's done on top of all that to smooth things out. The other idea that's out there that this is bringing me to, and it's something that we've been talking about really since Trending in Ed started back in 2016, 2017, and that is this concept of the Uncanny Valley. The idea that as AI gets closer to human but doesn't quite get there, it's going to create these feelings of uncanniness, this sense of being unnerved that I think the ScarJo example is a case of. Sometimes when something seems almost right, but then you find out that it's wrong, there's this feeling of fundamental betrayal underneath the technology. It's something AI was facing early on in its image generation. Remember all the six-fingered oddities that were out there. It's stuff that will continue to have to be smoothed over, at least for the foreseeable future. I'd envision the smoothing over expertise to be something that is uniquely human, and then the AIs will have to get trained up to learn from its mistakes. It'll be an interesting context as the mistake tolerance seems to go down. I wonder what you think about that, Nancy. Education in many ways is a place where we have to allow for failure, really almost encourage failure to truly enable learning. But at the same time, when it comes to AI, there's a lot of risk aversion, as I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of disincentives to be a first mover who gets caught with their pants down. What the LA Unified School District does coming out of the Ed debacle is going to be something we're going to want to continue to monitor. One of the reasons why I think generative AI had such amazing adoption was that it was actually exceeding expectations to start. I'm still seeing that depending on where I use the generative AI. But the other aspect of Ed that I think is worth exploring is that of data interoperability and seamless integrations. That's the place where I don't think we're quite there. Folks at times talk about Apple and how its system all works together. Even as simple a task as developing what you say, Nancy, in an outside platform in the case of 11 Labs, it's a lot easier to do it in platform here in Descript, even though I will say I think you might have sounded a little better when I used 11 Labs. So much of it really comes down to solving real problems for people, doing so in a way that's really seamlessly integrated, an effortless, frictionless user interface, paired with data privacy and good integrations of the data stories on the back end. The reality is in education and K-12 education, higher ed, certainly in enterprise as well, the reality is that there's a lot of technical debt when it comes to data, a lot of places where folks adopt a shortcut so that they can get something out the door. Meanwhile, percolating under the hood, there is a bit more of a data mess that needs to get disentangled, cleaned up, integrated and filtered, structured in such a way that the AI can be built clean and explainable on top of it. I think it's going to be critical, as will be the subtler, more emotional design elements that will need to be in place for us to cross the uncanny valley. Thoughts on all of this, Nancy?
Just to expand on the concept of the Uncanny Valley, Masahiro Mori is the Japanese roboticist who published Gukumi no Tani, or the Uncanny Valley, in 1970. He put forth the hypothesis that as robots become more human-like, they reach a point where they're almost human, but with subtle imperfections. This will make them seem eerie or uncanny. I'd argue that not only is AI leaving the peak of inflated expectations and is headed to the trough of disillusionment, but it's all due to the fact that we're deep into the uncanny valley these days. This is why we need to think about how humans get mixed in to smooth things over, as you say. For the time being, AI will need human partners to keep things from getting too awkward and creepy, yet another reason to keep humans in the loop.
Yes, indeed. It's an interesting type of failure mode we see out of these outputs. I will say that the latest instance of Claude Sonnet, has been pretty impressive in terms of not coming across as uncanny and really being programmed in such a way that it kind of stays out of those awkward moments. It'll be interesting to find the right balance of inserting AI where it adds value, adds scale, but then doing so in a way that still gets the right level of humanity in its emotional design. Donald Norman, UX guru, famously wrote not just the design of everyday things, which is great, but also his follow-up book, Emotional Design, I think is super relevant nowadays, where as the AIs are being built, we got to think not just about the letter of the law, but its spirit, and not just the head of the bot, but its heart. And can you design ways to blend in the right elements of humanity, the right surprising social and scarce components of what it means to be human? How do we sprinkle them in as the AIs increase our scale, increase our availability, and really increase our individual ability to do truly great things? Nancy, anything else? Any parting thoughts as we wrap up here today?
Just that it will continue to take a village. It will always require multiple points of view and varied perspectives to do great things. But increasingly, the team will not be exclusively human. More and more intelligent agents will be joining the collaborative process, and the tools will be changing rapidly, so you have to keep plowing forward trying new things. If it's too easy, you're probably not trying hard enough. The meaning is made in productive struggle. So let's roll up our sleeves and start building things.
Amazing stuff, as always, Nancy. Just to recap what we're saying here at Trending in Ed. 1. Artificial intelligence has officially entered Gartner's peak of inflated expectations, and in fact, it's starting to move into the trough of disillusionment. So venture forth with care. Remember data privacy. Remember the uncanny valley. Remember cybersecurity. Thar be dragons, but there's also upside. And the best way to really advance our collective game is to continue to do things with these new tools. Try out alternatives. Get good with flexibility. Get good with your adaptivity quotient, your adaptive intelligence, or AQ. The only way you develop that adaptability is by putting yourself into desirable difficulty, putting yourself into those sticky wickets that result in true growth through productive struggle. You might make it tricky enough that you'll even need the help of an AI friend to navigate. As William Gibson said, the future is here now, it's just not very evenly distributed. If you have the privilege of accessing these technologies to be able to create things with them, in some ways there's a responsibility to do so, and there's a responsibility to do it critically with your eyes open. It's something that we're trying to model here at Trending in Ed. Hopefully you're enjoying what you're hearing. We'd love to hear from our listeners to let us know how we're doing, what you want to be hearing next. Thanks as always to Nancy for being here. Always a pleasure. For those of you who did stick it out and are enjoying what you're getting from Trending in Ed, please write us a review, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. Thanks again for listening. This is Trending in Ed.